Are we ever surprised when it comes to Alec Murdaugh? Y'all might know by now that Alec Murdaugh's defense team has moved for a new trial over the events that happened on June 7th, 2021, when Alec Murdaugh's wife Maggie and son Paul were shot to death at their Moselle property in North Carolina. In 2023, Alec Murdaugh was convicted of this double homicide. Alec Murdaugh's defense team says that Alec Murdaugh has a constitutional right to a new trial after Clerk of Court Becky Hill violated her oath of office as well as her client's constitutional rights to an impartial jury. From what we know to this date, several jurors have signed affidavits stating that Becky Hill influenced the jurors by telling them that they could not trust the defense attorneys, could not trust Alec Murdaugh, and that they were not allowed to leave for smoke breaks until a verdict was arrived at, or threatening them, so to speak, that they were going to have to stay in a hotel that night that they weren't ready for if they didn't render a verdict that very day they were handed the verdict. And we know that she took a few of them on a trip to New York City and apparently promised the jurors part of the revenue from her forthcoming book, Behind the Doors of Justice, if they decided the verdict the way she wanted, which was a verdict of guilty. Here, we're going to listen to an excerpt of an interview with Becky Hill from before her book was released and before the jurors released this information about how she tried to influence them and influence the verdict. And then we're going to listen to a recent interview from her co-writer, Neil Gordon, to see what he has to say. If y'all haven't yet, please meet Becky Hill, Clerk of Court for the Honorable Judge Newman.
I could tell just from talking to the jurors about daily things, nothing about the trial at all. The verdict was already pretty sealed when we went to Moselle. There wasn't going to take much, and I knew it wasn't going to take long for them to come to a decision about a verdict.
According to the jurors' affidavits, Becky Hill knew a lot more than she let on in this interview. In this clip, you'll hear Rebecca's response to the question, when did you first have the idea to write this book about the Murdaugh trial?
I think the seed was planted back before the trial. And did I really think that I would write a book? I think the thinking was there, but then I happened to meet some people that kind of put feet to the dream, so to speak.
Wow. So she was thinking about writing a book before the trial for which she was the clerk of court for the judge, and then this became her dream?
Let me ask you this question. One of the things that struck me in reading your book was the insight you had into that jury. It was almost like you knew from the very beginning what they were thinking.
How interesting that that was an impression from an avid observer of this trial.
Well, let me ask you about that field trip. That's one of the most baffling parts of this trial. It was requested by the defense attorneys. They felt that it would show logistically that Alec Murdaugh couldn't have committed the crimes of which he was convicted. But you said in the book that that was what sealed his fate, that it actually worked against Murdaugh. Tell us about that.
It
Becky.
did. The defense attorneys thought that it was going to be used in their favor. That's why I think they requested it, and Judge Newman granted it. So when we were out there on the property and walking side by side, there was hardly any conversation, no talking at all. And everyone was doing their own measurements in their own way. They were walking things out, I think, going over in their mind what they had heard throughout the trial and putting it all together. It was very heavy out there that day, seeing all the jurors contemplating and in thought of what they were looking at and seeing with their own eyes. I don't think that the defense attorneys thought it would go that way.
She certainly does have amazing insight to what those jurors were thinking and feeling.
Becky, let's talk about the verdict in that moment. I remember being in the courtroom that night, seeing you walk by with a look on your face like it was about to happen. But you knew, you were one of the few people. We kept hearing from all these national observers that it would be weeks, that it would take forever for this jury to reach a verdict, and that they may not, in fact, reach a verdict. But you, from the beginning, had a sense of what was really going to happen.
Oh boy, I think it's going to turn out in retrospect that this interview is rather incriminating.
Were you surprised at how fast it was?
I was not surprised.
Now ain't that interesting, because literally everyone else in the world was wildly surprised.
It's called that sense, or a woman's gut. It's called that sixth sense that you may have.
And apparently, maybe it was a little bit more than that.
I was very in tune with, from watching the jury, that's something that TV watchers did not have the ability to see. But those of us that were in the courtroom, we could watch the jury, we could watch their body language, we could see their faces and what expressions they had. And from hearing the different witnesses that were on the stand, we could tell that, you know, how in tune they were with each witness. And I just felt like, even though it was a lot of circumstantial evidence, they were able to put it all together and come up with the verdict that they got, and they got it right.
Well, let me ask you about that moment. Probably one of the most watched, most anticipated, probably for you, very stressful moments. But the moment when you read that verdict, I remember being in the courtroom, I was thinking to myself, how is she doing this? I mean, you'd been working yourself and your staff, no sleep for weeks. And here you are at this just incredibly important moment, the apex of this case, reading out the verdict. Becky, what was that moment like for you?
It was epic.
And yes, the clerk of court says reading that verdict, it was epic. Now let's hear Vinnie Politano interview Neil Gordon just a couple days ago, who was the co-writer of the book Behind the Doors of Justice.
Joining us tonight, said there was a co-author here, co-author of Behind the Doors of Justice, the Murdaugh Murders, Neil Gordon is joining us tonight. Neil, great to see you. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Vinny.
Okay, before we get into some real details here, your reaction to what happened today. I called it like an earthquake centered down there in the low country, shaking all of us who followed this case. What's your reaction to what you heard from the defense today?
I was shocked. I worked with Becky for 6 months as both a friend and a colleague on the book. And we've had many discussions in writing the book about any kinds of conversations that she would have had with anybody associated. As Harpoolian mentioned, I mean, she has many different tasks. She's got to work with the judge, the media, the public, dealing with the food, dealing with defense attorneys and so forth. And very little with the jury. I mean, there is a chief bailiff that keeps their eyes on the jury at all times, and there's very little contact.
So, in preparing this book, were there any conversations that you had with Becky about conversations she had with jurors during the course of the trial, including the foreperson who the defense is saying there were private conversations, allegations that they're on the Moselle property and they walked off together? They may have had a conversation in the jury room bathroom.
Well, Vinny, all that I know and that we put in the book, you mentioned Moselle. There was an order from the judge for there to be silence. There was no conversation to be had. So I asked her and said no conversation was had. We talked about a couple of different things. If you meet Becky, you know that she's a very spiritual person, and she mentioned that the jury was very prayerful. It was mentioned to her that they prayed often. Becky prayed often with her staff and all. And I asked her directly, I said, did you ever pray with the jury? And she said, oh, no. No legal entity is allowed to have prayer with the jury. So, you know, it was very clear to me that there was a line there.
Okay, now, it's unusual. I've been doing here at Court TV for a long time. I don't know if I've ever seen a book written by the clerk of the court after one of these big trials. I've seen them written by the attorneys on both sides, and sometimes they got in a little trouble for that. I've seen plenty of them written by jurors in states that permitted after a certain amount of time. What was the motivation that Becky had to get together with you to write this book? And was this the master plan before the trial started? Was it plotted that this was going to be the big retirement nest egg?
Oh, I don't know about that. I didn't actually meet Becky until 3 weeks after the trial.
Till after?
My wife, 3 weeks after the trial, my wife, like millions of people, were just glued to Court TV, and they had trouble working. She decided to go with a colleague, Addie Strozier, to Walterboro to actually watch the trial. She had a chance meeting with Becky the day that the vans were leaving to go to Moselle. In fact, I remember what was said was that there was, Becky was actually making sure that people did not get pictures of the jury. That's how intent she was on that. And so Melissa mentioned to Becky, took a selfie and then reached her out, 3 weeks later and said, hey, do you mind if I use this in a coffee table book? And Becky said, this has been the trial of the century, and I'm thinking about it. I just don't know how to go about it. And so they brought me in as a colleague. I mean, my background has been in journalism for 30 years. I instantly liked her. And as you held up the book, Behind the Doors of Justice, you're right. No clerk of court has ever really written a book to just explain, just minute by minute, how intense a trial situation is and how reverent you have to be to the truth and to law. And I got to tell you, you asked my reaction. I was pretty upset at what Harpootlian said was the motivation that Becky had. Last time I checked, Simon & Schuster did not send us a check for $200,000. The Gordons and the Hills put up $30,000 of our own money because we felt this was an interesting story to tell. So right away, Vinny, for that to be motivation for her to get a book deal is completely false, right there.
So what you just explained to me is that you're in the negative on this.
We self-published.
You self-published.
We self-published.
So that means you didn't get the big advance, none of that.
No.
Okay.
We advanced a check for $30,000. You got attorney fees, you got to get set up on Amazon, you got to print so many copies, liability insurance, editors, you name it. But we felt it was a story that should be told. I mean, in my lifetime, I'm 59 years old. I don't know that there will ever be another trial like this. And it was my honor and pleasure to work with somebody with such integrity and character as someone like Becky Hill. Did you interact with her? I know that you were there.
I was there. I did not. Some of our staff had the opportunity to do that. And you said another trial like this in our lifetime. Well, we're hoping there's not going to be another one like this, because that's what the defense wants, is an exact repeat of the trial. Obviously, they want a different ending to the whole thing. Have you spoken to Becky today after all of this has become public?
Very briefly, as you might imagine, she's had calls off the hook from media outlets. And as much as she'd like to make a statement, these allegations are so deep that she has hired counsel and they're going over them. But I am told they are going to put out a statement in the near future. And one thing I know about Becky Hill, she will answer each and every one of these allegations truthfully. She's one of the most genuine people I know, and it made me sick seeing this played out on national TV, and I just felt like I needed to speak out.
And again, I've prefaced everything today saying, if this is true, because
thank you,
because that's a big part of it, right? And the fact, I mean, she's been doing this for years, right? So, I mean, she understands the rules and the role and everything else. So that's why I was so shocked by these allegations. Now, there were some strange things that happened during the course of this trial, including this whole Facebook controversy with juror, I think it was 758, who ended up getting kicked off. Was there any of that sort of drama? Because I have not read the book yet, I'll be honest with you, okay? 100% honest, I have not read this book yet. Now everyone has to read it, right?
Vicky,
to figure out what the defense
Vinny,
is talking about.
I'm going to send you an autographed copy.
Oh, thank you. But is there anything in here about the juror who got bounced from the trial because of whatever was going on with the Facebook posts, with the ex-husband, et cetera?
Yes, there is, and what it all led to, and this I think is really the most important part of it in our book, is it led to Judge Newman, very unusual, calling the jury back in chambers and interviewing her calling the juror rather, and interviewing her about the situation. And what he said, and he addressed this to the public and to the gallery, he said he felt that she was discussing the merits of the case, whatever way you wanted to go with it, with the outside public. And so the judge did decide to disqualify her and send her home.
And does Becky, was she discussing it with Becky? Is that who she was speaking with?
Oh, no. Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. Apparently, and again, I'm not crystal clear on this, but
this is not sworn testimony tonight, Neil. You're not under oath, so just your best recollection.
Thank you.
Will work tonight.
Thank you. Yeah, Vinny, there were apparently some Facebook posts that were out there, allegedly by somebody who knew her, and talked about her talking about the case in the community. That was enough for the judge to call the person in. And then after interviewing that juror, he decided that she should not be on the jury anymore. So the end result is the judge made the decision. And we didn't really cover much of, because Becky really didn't have any involvement in it that we discussed.
So as we sit here tonight and you think about doing this project with Becky, you guys funded it yourselves. Are there any regrets? Anything like, oh, maybe we shouldn't have done this, or oh, we put stuff in here that could be problematic and could perhaps compromise the trial or compromise Becky?
Well, that's a fair question, Vinny. And obviously, when we sat down, we decided that we wanted to share as much as we could with, and I should tell you, this was run through a media attorney. This was run through the Ethics Commission in the state of South Carolina about even a clerk of court being allowed to write a book, an elected official. And they said as long as, sealed documents aren't shared and as long as confidential information is not shared, it's okay. And so we went on that premise before we even started. And we carefully vetted this through media attorneys and editors, and we feel very good about it because it's not so much about the trial. You were there, you saw, and you can see the gallery, small town courthouse. It's like Mayberry, town square. The media is all out in front. People have an opportunity to come in and see this, almost an opportunity of a lifetime. People came from New York and other parts of the country just to see this. And it was wonderful to be able to share how when people work together for the common good to do the right thing, this can come off as, I think, a well thought of trial and how it was run. And that was really her job, was to run the courtroom. That's she's like the operations manager of the courtroom. And from what I could tell, it seemed to me she did a very good job, and I'm proud to call her a friend, and I'm proud to co-author the book with her, and I'd write another one with her.
Well, I've got the title for the next one, Behind the Doors of Justice, and you follow how all of this sort of works its way through the whole system. Unbelievable. Neil Gordon, appreciate you coming on tonight. I always want both sides of every story, especially when one side is really loud with theirs. So I hope you'll come back as things develop.
I'd be honored to. And Vinny, thank you for being balanced on this and an opportunity to come on and share. And I hope you have a great rest of the program.
All right. Thanks so much. Neil Gordon joining us tonight.
When it comes to Alec Murdaugh, you can never cease to amaze. Everybody, please leave a comment letting us know what you think. We all want to know what you think, and I definitely want to know what you think about this one. This is Kelly from Watch the Obsession. Thanks for taking time to watch this video. Please click like and subscribe and hit the bell for future notifications.